Brill, thanks so much, Rabia. So welcome everybody to our second event, marking the end of our Islamophobia awareness campaign. My name is Zinat. I am a barrister and the founder of the Redefined project. I am co-hosting today's event with Rabia, who is one of our fantastic team members working on our Islamophobia awareness campaign. For those of you who have not joined us before, Redefined is an alternative learning and awareness platform for lawyers from minoritised backgrounds who are committed to social justice and activism. We create space for honest, frank and critical conversations which are not happening across mainstream legal platforms and that we believe require spotlighting. We're super excited to host this important conversation today with Muslim lawyers on the topic of navigating faith and legal practice. Many Muslim aspiring lawyers, and indeed lawyers already in the profession, worry about how to navigate their career whilst staying true to their faith-based values. This is the conversation we are having today, but situated in the broader context of rising Islamophobia, racism and xenophobia in our society. The legal profession is a microcosm of society and as such embodies and perpetuates the same structural injustices. It is important that our conversation today is understood amidst that backdrop. We are grateful to you all for joining us and supporting the fundraising campaign for the Uyghur Tribunal in memory of Akil Nurali, a junior barrister who sadly very recently passed away and who was dedicated to that cause. Thank you for supporting the important work and honouring Akil's legacy. From today's event, we've raised £137 and combined with last week's event, we've raised over £260. So thank you all so much. With all that said, I'm now going to hand you over to Rabia, who will tell you more about our fantastic panellists we've got for you today.
Thank you, Zinat. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I'll just begin by introducing all of our speakers. So one of our speakers today is Zara Hassan. Zara is a barrister at Garden Court Chambers. Her legal practice centres around migrant rights, racial justice, state accountability, trans and queer liberation, and gender equality. She is also a founding committee member of the Black Protest Legal Support, the current Equality and Diversity Officer for Legal Sector Workers United, and on the Executive Committee for the Human Rights Lawyers Association. Zara has previously worked for non-profit organisations including Liberty, South and Southall Black Sisters in legal policy and campaigning roles. So thank you for being here, Zara, today. We also have Ali Bajra QC. So Ali is a highly ranked QC specialising in fraud, violent crime and terrorism. Ali studied law at LSE. He took a year out to travel before coming to the bar in 1993. He interned at the Independent Jamaica Council for Human Rights in Kingston in 1999, and he was a Pegasus Scholar at the Crown Law Office in New Zealand in 1996. He is also a Crown Court recorder, a Gray's Bencher and an advanced advocacy trainer and is a former master of students. So thank you for being here today, Ali. We also have Faisat. So Faisat is a private client solicitor specialising in tax and trusts. She is also the founder of Her Sister's Circle, a community group which aims to improve the careers and social well-being of women of all ages, races and religions. Faisat is a member of the Young Women's Advisory Council at Forward UK, which is the leading organisation working to end violence against women and girls. Born Muslim, Nigerian, Black female, Faisat has been navigating and finding her place for most of her career. So thank you for being here today, Faisat. We then have Mira. So Mira Hamad is a pupil barrister at Garden Court North Chambers. Her practice is driven by an emphasis on human rights, and she focuses on criminal defence, inquests and inquiries. She is currently instructed in relation to the Manchester Arena inquiry and the Grenfell Tower inquiry. Prior to commencing pupillage, Mira qualified as a solicitor. She completed her training contract at Browdy Jackson Cantor Solicitors, focusing on inquests and high-value clinical negligence claims. She's worked as a paralegal on the Hillsborough inquest for 3 years as part of the BGC team representing the 22 bereaved families. Before commencing her legal career, Mira spent 2 years working in the Middle East as a junior consultant for 2XL. And we also have Sana today. So Sana is a trainee solicitor at Silver Circle Law Firm Travers Smith. She is the co-founder at Strive, a diversity organisation taking diversity beyond tick boxing. She's also a diversity ambassador, speaker and regular panellist on numerous forums, events and top performing business and legal podcasts. Over to you, Zinat.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Rabia. So I'm sure everybody can hear that we've got a fantastic panel lined up for you. And I'm going to jump straight in to the questions that we've got for them. So Mira, coming to you first, please. How does your faith inform your activism?
Well, for me, I think actually my faith informs nearly all of my political views and my activism in that way, as well as my identity. So I'm Palestinian, and that meant that from a very early age, I was very interested in issues of justice, fairness, obviously because of our experiences as Palestinians, but as well as a Muslim, I think our faith teaches us a lot about justice. It teaches us a lot about fighting for what's right. And I think that has shaped my career direction as well as my activism. And I think that kind of commitment to a better world and a fairer world and justice comes directly from Islam.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that many of us resonate with that response. I definitely do. Coming to Sana next, please. And Sana comes with a slightly different perspective as a trainee in a city firm. So my question for you, Sana, is have there been any situations where your faith-based values have felt compromised?
Such a difficult question, Zina. I think that the city itself is a difficult place to be, in the sense that it can be counterintuitive to a lot of the things that you stand for. So one biggest one is, the drinking events. So especially corporate lawyers, they do a lot of there's a lot of events, there's a lot of networking, and I'm sure it's the same at the bar as well. And I remember when I started out, I always felt really uncomfortable because I didn't know what to do in those situations. It's like, of course, drinking was never an option, but there were all of these things where, should I even be here in the first place? Is this the right place for me to be? And the trainers will say, "Hey, Sana, come on, let's go to the bar. Let's go to the bar." And the bar is not a place that you'll ever see me at, and neither is the pub. So I never attended those things, but the pressure is always there. You're kind of thinking, I don't know, should I go? Should I not go? Should I go? Should I not go? And you know that you're not going to drink, but some part of it feels inherently wrong because you're just in that environment, and it makes you kind of question a lot of things. But other than that, I've been quite fortunate to be in a place where I can be very open about my faith, and a lot of that comes with the firm that I'm with. Maybe if I was in a different organization, maybe what I'm saying would be different, but I'm quite lucky to be with a firm that's very very careful and very open to faith and what it means for different people. And not only that, but it's also very accommodating in terms of providing space to pray, providing the time actually to pray and not feeling uncomfortable about it, to celebrate faith for all that it is. So I've been extremely fortunate to say that I actually haven't been in a situation where I felt that my faith was compromised, but I have been at the crossroads where there's always been a little bit of a tension where you're kind of thinking, oh, I just don't know about this. Is this a place I'm supposed to be at? So there have been situations like that, but not where it's been a complete compromise.
Fantastic, thanks, Sana. That's definitely, again, I'm sure many of us can also resonate with. I remember in pupillage days being told you've got to show your face, you've got to be visible, and I'm like, but I just really don't want to be visible in that way, and showing my face for a cranberry juice and then leaving, and then people thinking you're weird because you're leaving, and all of that. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing your experiences. And next I'm going to come to Zara, and it's a question that is an interesting one, I think. So we often hear about imposter syndrome. Do you agree that the issue should be reframed to organisations needing to reflect on their exclusionary practices rather than the issue being individuals feeling like they don't belong?
Yes, I do definitely. I've had this conversation quite a few times with other Black and brown colleagues at the bar, and how useful the term imposter syndrome really is. And I think it's always helpful to have sort of a term that kind of identifies our collective experiences as marginalized people at the bar. But I think ultimately it does place the onus on the individual that you don't belong, or it's your feelings that are wrong in that situation. And absolutely, I think that it really needs to refocus on what institutions like the bar, like law firms, like inns can do to ensure that it's properly representative and inclusive. And I think, you know, the starting point really is to drill down into what are the problems people are facing, what are the barriers to progression that Muslim people at the bar face, and why is it that this kind of symptom is often something that we all experience. And I think, I mean, sort of talking about what some of the other speakers have mentioned about sort of how their faith has really been highlighted to them in these spaces. It's not just kind of a natural thing to just be who you are, but it's almost sort of forced on you to realize your difference. I think a really telling experience I had was very early on into sort of me exploring the bar as a career option. I went to a dinner at Gray's Inn, and I guess, you know, maybe for some people I'm not visibly obvious Muslim, and I was at a table and there was a very senior bencher who was sitting at the table and was talking to a group of us, and I was the only non-white person in that space, and he said something to the whole group which was like, oh, it's really good to sit at a table at these dinners with Muslims because then you get more wine. And it was a really sort of, you know, and I was quite young at the time, and it was a really sort of shocking experience. And I think, you know, naming what I experienced in that instance as imposter syndrome is just obviously not helpful. Obviously, there's kind of cultural issues at the bar with people understanding how to speak to people from different backgrounds, and recognizing that, you know, we're not all the same, and we definitely aren't anymore. The bar is far more diverse than it ever has been. And so I think really thinking about how we can essentially train those people to reflect on their own prejudices is really important, rather than putting the onus on us to fit in better or assimilate or anything like that.
Great, thanks so much for that. I think that's really insightful, because it's really easy to kind of label ourselves really quickly as imposters, and I think reframing that narrative is something that we need to do more of, so thank you so much for that. Ali, coming to you next, please, if that's okay, as the most senior person on this webinar. I say that with respect. As you've progressed through your career, has there been a difference in how you've been treated as a Muslim lawyer? Was it different when you were more junior compared to where you are now?
Well, my experiences started in the early 1990s. I came to the bar in 93, so I've been here now for 27 years. And I've seen a lot of changes over that time. When I did pupillage in 1993, I was in the chambers, and two people I think have mentioned that issue of drink. When I did my pupillage, I wasn't going out nightly drinking with people in chambers, and frankly, I didn't think anything of it. A colleague of mine who was a co-pupil would go out drinking with the members of chambers almost every night. He got taken on and I didn't. And so that was a sort of early introduction to the sort of differences that could make a difference. But I have to say that that was one of the very few experiences that I've had which I can point to or remember as being a negative experience as a result of being a Muslim at the bar. Because essentially, if I don't know actually the makeup of our audience and how senior or junior they are, whether they want to come to the bar or not, the message I've got 27 years later in 2020 for anyone who's thinking about a career at the bar is that you shouldn't be put off. Whatever your background, whatever racial or religious background you have, it's transformed in the last 27 years in my experience. I'm lucky I'm with Zara in Garden Court Chambers, and we get a completely warped view of the bar, when I think the whites in our chambers are probably a minority group, and we need to start doing some positive discrimination for white males from private schools, probably in our chambers. So, but we get a warped impression. But just looking at the bar around me, 27 years ago, there was nobody, it was unthinkable that a woman wearing a hijab would become a barrister. And they'd not just become barristers, but they'd gone on to take silk and become appointed to the bench. We've seen, you know, a complete sea change in the chamber's makeup. If you looked at, people didn't have websites in 1993, but if you ever looked at the drop-down ladder for barristers in an imaginary website in 1993, you would have seen 98% or more white members of chambers. Now you look at the chamber's website and the variety is growing, and it's growing every single year. So my message is actually, you know, in 27 years, I've had very few negative experiences that I can remember. In the early 2000s, right through to the mid 2010s, that was the time in which we had a real upsurge in so-called Islamic terrorism cases. And that obviously reflected in society's attitude to Muslims, and it reflected also in the bar, because it's a microcosm, as somebody's already said, of society. And so there were negative things done, said in your presence, many of them a bad attempt at jokes. There were things at which I may have taken some slight offense. There were some things which I simply brushed off and ignored. But actually, most of the things were low in seriousness. What I managed to do was build up a career in terrorism cases, because those that were charged with these types of offences who were from a Muslim background actually preferred having a Muslim barrister represent them. As a result of building up an experience in terrorism cases, I was able to do all types of terrorism cases, which means that I've dealt with a number of alleged far-right terrorism cases where these people have been, on the face of it, at least superficially, anti-Muslim. And so that was the irony, that I found myself not only in terrorism cases as a generalization, but also in far-right or alleged far-right terrorism cases. And I would say, when I'd sit down with my client immediately, first meeting with a client in an alleged far-right case, I'd say, I've got to tell you right away, of course you now have met me and can see my background is not your own. I can tell you right away that I'm more than happy to represent you, as I would every single client that I have. And just want to check that you're happy to be represented by me. And every one of them would say yes. And I built up a perfectly good practice in that side as well, and got on very well with every single one of those clients. So my message actually is, whilst, you know, the bar's come a long way, and I know we've got a long way to go to be as we should be as a profession. But I think actually the message that the audience, anybody who's thinking about a career at the bar, or might be in the bar or on the legal profession generally, and wondering whether it's the place for them, is stick at it. I've stuck at it, and 27 years later, it's been very good to me. So I hope that's the message that my audience can take away.
Thanks so much, Ali, and for that nugget of hope as well, because we don't want to be overly cynical, but realistic with a sprinkle of hope. So thanks so much. Faiza, I'm going to come to you next. But before I do, I just want to deal with a concern in the chat box. I think Ahmed's concerned that it's a women's only conference. I think you will have registered in light of the promo material that went out, and you've just had Ali speak. So hopefully that deals with your concerns, and obviously if it doesn't, then feel free to leave. But as what we do at Redefined is deliberately curate panels that don't look like every other panel that you see at legal events. So I'm really proud of the fact that we've got lots of women on the panel today. So yeah, I just thought I'd deal with that and nip it in the bud. And Faiza, I'm coming to you next. And my question for you is, do you feel that you can show up to work as your full self?
Thank you, Zinat. As my full self, so I actually had trouble with trying to answer this question, because it would presuppose I knew what my full self was. And that is something that I often have trouble with, you know, being Nigerian, Muslim, obviously Black, living in, you know, South London. There's so much that makes me me. And so I didn't want to kind of come to work. So I remember when I was a trainee, I didn't want to come to work and kind of be too full on, because, you know, there had been comments about, oh, you're the first non-middle class that's worked for us. This was when I was a paralegal, and I was like, okay, it's a weird comment. And then, you know, when I do explain that, oh, okay, I don't eat pork, I don't know this, and why don't you eat pork? Why don't you drink? Well, because I'm Muslim. And they'll be like, oh, okay, I've never met, you know, a Nigerian Muslim before. Like, apparently you can only be Muslim if you're Somali. You can only be a Black Muslim if you're Somali. But so when I was younger, I would definitely say that no, I wasn't comfortable. I couldn't bring my full self to work. I hid a lot. I didn't hide it in the sense of I would, if someone asked me a question, I would lie or anything like that. It wasn't like that. It was more of a don't ask, don't tell. It's none of your business. I'm just going to come here, do my work and go home. That was literally what it was, the younger. But the older you get, the more confident you get, the more experience you have, and you start to realize I'm here because of my ability, not because of who I am. And so if I make a mistake, then fair enough, correct me. But it's not a case of, oh, Faiza, she can't be asked, or you can't ask her because she doesn't know what she's doing. She's just this young person who doesn't know anything about us or our culture, and that's kind of the work thing. And now I don't care. I'm not even that senior. I've qualified last March, so March 2019, and I really don't care anymore. I come to work. I'm in-house now, so it is a lot different. I wear what I like. I'm a modest dresser, so I don't obviously don't wear like short skirts and stuff like that. If I do wear a skirt, I always wear tights, and it's not, you know, that kind of thing. And people accept me for exactly who I am. There's nothing to it.
Thanks so much. Fearless, Faiza, as always. We love to see it, so thank you so much. Coming back to Sana now, if that's okay, please. And the question is, what have your experiences been as a visibly Muslim woman working in the city? Have there been any challenges? And if so, how have you responded to those?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this will probably echo what Faiza said, but I remember when I first started out and just thinking, oh my God, this is not the place for me. There's no one in this entire room that looks like me. I mean, it was hard to find an Asian, let alone a full hijabi wearing girl wandering around the corridors. And I was kind of thinking, oh no, I've made a mistake, right? I don't know how I'm going to survive for the next 2 years. This is going to end in absolute disaster. What was I thinking? Get me out of here. And then after the initial panic subsided, I also did a little bit of hiding. You know, it wasn't necessarily hiding. It was more like I was trying to not draw attention to myself, but actually, given the way that I dressed, it's impossible to not draw attention to myself, because the minute that I walked into the room, the entire room would look. So it didn't matter if I wasn't saying anything. Just my presence was just so loud, or I felt that it was loud, that I couldn't exactly do much of hiding. So when I realized that, I kind of thought about it, and I said, wait, hang on a second. We need to reevaluate the situation. I mean, I'm not getting anything by not doing much. If anything, I'm still drawing attention to myself, so I might as well, you know, accept it and move on with it. And as soon as I got to that stage, I felt like a huge weight just lifted off my shoulders. You know, I was so free, and then I started to get a little bit too reckless with things, as it normally happens, and then my whole self came out. And I'm sure Travis just kind of looked at me and thought, we were not ready for this. Like, what are you doing? So after that, it was completely fine, but the initial stages were quite hard. And then even when I actually kind of started the training contract and started working, it was still an adjustment period. It took some adjustment in terms of the drinking events. I struggled a little bit with that, because there was always this thing that, like, I don't know if I should be here, but at the same time I had to show my face and have my glass of orange juice and then exit. And also, I'm never one to stay out late. I think people didn't understand the fact that I still live with my parents. So a lot of the trainees were kind of like, oh my God, you live at home? And I was like, yeah, it's great. I mean, everyone does everything for me. I don't have to do anything. I don't iron my own clothes. I don't cook my own food. It's like, I'm living the life, guys. But I think people kind of looked at me with a lot of skepticism when I said that. So but I love it. So that was difficult. I think for my parents, especially when I started the training contract, it was a massive shock. I mean, my parents were sold on this dream that their daughter was going to be doing a regular 9 to 5. They were going to tell all of their friends that my daughter, she's a lawyer. Like that was it, right? And then instead, they never got to see me because I was at Travis pretty much doing some really, really late nights. And I remember getting to the end of the week and my parents being like, so what is it that you actually do? I was like, law? And they said, no, but what do you do, right? Like, why are you in the office so late? And that was a massive challenge, trying to manage expectations with my parents and trying to explain that my hours were going to be crazy and no, it's not going to get any better. So life kind of sucks here. And they're like, I don't understand why you work so hard. You don't get paid enough for this. That was a challenge. And I remember talking to my partners about it and saying, like, guys, you know, you guys seem to think that I can just sleep in the office, but sleeping in the office isn't an option for me. My mom will have a heart attack if I do not come home for one night. I am dead meat. This is not happening. But hopefully, you know, over time, my parents, they adjusted. It took them about one whole seat. But I think, you know, 6 months later, it is still something. They adjusted half a year. We made progress. And now they're completely fine with it. But that, it was things that I did not need. And I remember telling this to mom, I was like, Mom, Dad, I don't need this stress right now. Like, I'm trying to navigate a whole new sea. I've got no idea what I'm doing. I don't have any friends because everyone in here is white. So now I have to be friends with all of these white people. And I went to a uni that was largely BAME. And so in terms of my own upbringing, I grew up in Wembley, which is just full of Asians. So my time at Travis, I felt like an absolute culture shock. And you know, I was just adjusting to 100 things at once. So those were kind of the initial challenges when I first started out. And obviously, you know, being the person that didn't exactly blend in, being the person that, you know, stood out and having to go over there and make these conversations because people didn't really necessarily approach me as they would with the trainees. So I found myself being the one to take the lead on these kind of conversations, and it was a learning experience, but actually it turned out completely okay. I mean, I had a great time doing all of that. It was a lot of fun. And the other thing that I learned, which I think is quite important, is when I first started, I was a little bit worried about how I would do this whole networking side of things, because I kept on telling myself, well, you're not staying for any of the drinking stuff, you're not attending any of the, you're not going to the pub every Friday, and you're not going to the bar every week either. So when is this whole, you know, team building and bonding exercise going to happen with you? And actually, there are workarounds. So for me, that meant I would just email people I wanted to talk to, introduce myself and say, hey, so do you want to go grab a coffee? And it was great. It works really well because I get uninterrupted, you know, a one-to-one time with this partner or this associate or this other trainee. And it's just a really, really nice way to get to know someone. We'll catch up over dinner, we'll do a lot of lunches. And I prefer it that way rather than being in a room with like 100 people and either someone's too wasted and they don't know who you are anymore, they're going to forget who you are. They do remember you by tomorrow morning. The music is really loud, no one can hear you. And I just prefer that, and it works a lot better. So I think the takeaway is that there is always a workaround. You know, there is, whatever challenges you're facing, there is definitely things that you can do to make it work for you. And this is something that one of my partners said to me. She said, you know, you don't have to do things the way that everybody else is doing it. You just have to do things in a way that will work for you and that will allow you to be the best version of yourself, to put your best foot forward, and that will help you to progress. And, you know, there are ways to do that. And for me, that just meant having those one-to-ones in person instead of having it at the bar, and it works out exactly the same. So if you're a little bit anxious about how you're going to deal with these challenges, it's okay, guys. Like, everything will plan out. So there are ways around it.
Fantastic. That's really, really insightful. So much of that made me laugh because it reminded me of my own parents when they nearly also had to really struggle with the idea of me flying the nest and moving to London for masters and pupillage and all of that. But yeah, that was really great. Thanks so much, Sana. Coming back to Mira on the original same question, which was what your experiences have been as a visible Muslim woman at the bar, and actually, was that any different when you were a solicitor?
Well, it's interesting because I went all the way from being a paralegal up trainee solicitor, and then now as a pupil barrister. And I've had a real mixed bag of experiences, to be honest. All of my practice has been in the area, mostly in the area of actions against the police and inquests. It's a very like human rights driven area. It's also quite a white area of law, actually. There are some prominent barristers from minoritized backgrounds, but on the whole, and for example, I know Zenat, you work on the Grenfell inquiry, for example, it's not a very diverse inquiry, even though the people who are the bereaved, the survivors and the residents come from very diverse backgrounds. So it's a slightly, and certainly for myself, on Hillsborough, which was the first case that I worked on, there were a lot of lawyers, and I was most definitely the only hijabi, and there was, I think, maybe two black barristers and one black solicitor, and out of maybe, I don't know, illegal teams of over 50 to 100 lawyers altogether. So it's not a massively diverse area. Having said that, I've had some really bad experiences on the solicitor side. I had a really bad experience with actual kind of overt racism. And I really struggled with that because my background is kind of political activism, and I'm very used to kind of campaigning and, you know, going around and protesting and all of that. But then I felt like when it was happening to me, and I mean, these were people in the office who were literally saying things like, oh, I was at a gig and there was a Muslim woman there, and I was looking at her and I was thinking, what's she here for? And then me and my friend went up to her afterwards and she literally couldn't even speak English. And we were like, what are you even doing here? And things like people talking about cultures not fitting into the UK, talking about Muslims being like, well, how is it that all terrorists are Muslims then, if there isn't a problem? And I'm a very outspoken person in general, but weirdly, when it was happening to me and what was happening in my team, I felt like I just couldn't say anything. I was literally sat on my computer like, are you seriously kind of having these conversations around, like, hello? And even, you know, one colleague thought that it was a good idea to talk to me. It was just me and her. And she was talking to me about a really scary Muslim guy that she saw in the street. And I was like, do you really think I'm the audience for this particular story? And I really, really struggled to the point where actually at one point I was like, I actually don't want to go into work. It's a really miserable place to be because it was so consistent. And eventually I raised it. I got a very, I think, weak apology that started with, we didn't know that you were a Muslim. And I was like, and then there was this expectation that, well, we've had this issue, we've talked about it, let's move on. I later walked into the copy room and people were talking about how you're not allowed to say anything in the office anymore. I walked in and everything went quiet. And, you know, clearly I was the reason that you weren't allowed to say anything in the office anymore. So I've had that kind of experience, and I really learned from that because at the time I wanted to progress. You know, I was thinking, I really want to progress. And I know that if I make a fuss about this, I'm going to be seen by these people, by these colleagues who have a lot of influence on my career as a troublemaker, as not one of the right sort of people. And I kept my mouth shut, but there's a very big cost to that because you feel like you're losing your sense of self-respect. You feel like you're losing your sense of who you are. And I do think that actually after all of that happened, I did feel like it did impact kind of negatively on my relationships with my colleagues. But having said that, I've also had the reverse experiences where I think people have gone out of their way to try and support me. And I think partly because they saw me and they were like, oh, look, here's somebody who is kind of alone in this area and in this profession. And the reality is, before I started working in the law, I don't think I'd ever actually had an actual conversation with like a white middle-aged guy in my life. And since then I've made up for it. But all of the people who have actually gone out of their way, not all of them, but a lot of people who have gone out of their way to support me and actually been really interested, been really understanding of my faith. You know, I had a boss who was Israeli Jewish, who used to bring in dates for me every Ramadan, and would kind of go out of his way to actually, you know, show that he was really accommodating for Ramadan, really accommodating for me. And, you know, it got to a point where I was really comfortable with some colleagues and I'd just be like, look, can I just pray here in the corner when there was no prayer room? And they would go out of their way to kind of accommodate that. And in terms of on the bar side, it's been similar. So first time I actually ever got on my feet at the bar was when I was in first six, and I was shadowing a barrister at a youth court, and the DJ just, she was dealing with the case, and then she just said, you know what, I'm going to give your pupil rights of audience to deal with this point. And you can go out and you can come back after lunch and address me on it. Obviously, I nearly had a heart attack and kind of considered just legging it at that point and what would happen to my pupillage if I did. And I came back and I kind of addressed her on the point. It was a really simple point, and I think I probably was not that great, but she was like, you were really excellent. I think you've done really well. I think, you know, and made a point of saying, take this back to her head of chambers, you know, make sure. And I don't know, but I think that DJ wanted to champion somebody who she didn't usually see in front of her, and kind of give her support and that kind of thing. So I've had that. On the other side, I have had tribunals that have been quite harsh, and it's always very difficult because you might feel like you're getting treated in a certain kind of way, and you don't want to think, I'm like, you know, maybe it's just my style, maybe I'm rubbing them up the wrong way. And then I was in front of one particular coroner, and actually the client, when we were kind of having conference at lunch, the client just literally, we walked into the room and he turned around and said, oh my God, racism and sexism in practice. And I felt like this massive sense of relief, actually, because I had felt like I was getting a really rough ride for no particular reason. I mean, the coroner was treating me as though I'd kind of mortally offended them. I was like, I don't think I've said anything particularly terrible here. But it wasn't until my client said that I gave myself the permission to feel like, oh, you know what, there might be an element of bias working here. So I think it's been a really mixed bag. I think I would definitely echo people who say, don't let it put you off, because I think it's something that isn't necessarily, I think the law is a very hidebound profession, but it is by no means the only profession where you're going to face obstacles like this because of the society that we live in. As well, being up north, I think it's a bit different. I think there's a lot less diversity in certain places in the north. So in Liverpool is not massively diverse, or it's quite segregated in a sense. And so I definitely think don't let it put you off. But yeah, I've definitely had kind of both ends of it.
Thanks so much, Mira. I really like the fact that you're able to give kind of both sides of the coin. I don't like the fact that you've obviously had to go through those horrible encounters, but I feel like it really represents the truth for many of us, which you have good experiences and bad experiences. It's not all good, but it's also not all bad. So I think that was really helpful. Thank you so much. Ali, I'm going to come to you next and ask what your views are on the bar's approach to racism and whether you feel that that has changed over your years in practice.
The bar is talking about racism a lot more than it used to. There's no doubt about that. The bar from the very top down to the very bottom. I mean, I'm no expert or activist. There are others on this panel and outside this panel who are much more involved. I have to confess that over the last 27 years that I've been a barrister, I haven't got involved in the wider Bar Council, BSB type issues to do with equality and diversity as I could have done. I've just been too busy with my practice and trying to bring up my children and spend some time away from the law. And so those such as Zara and others who do such fantastic work as activists will know much more about this than me as experts. But the impression I get is that late in the day, and here we are talking in the last 5 years or so, the Bar Council, the BSB, has tried certainly to catch up with these things in terms of certain initiatives, reports, issuing more statistics on diversity figures, setting up task forces and the like. And owning up to there being an issue in terms of racism and a lack of equality and diversity, that's an important thing. And I think the BSB a couple of years ago issued an anti-racism statement, which is an important thing. It may have been last year. And so it's progress, as I said earlier. It's, we've come a long way, but there's a long, long way to go. But what I want to do is not look at the very top at the Bar Council and the BSB and say, what are you doing in terms of equality and diversity at the bar? I mean, they obviously have their role to play, but chambers, you need to come down to the middle tier and to look at chambers individually and ask hard questions of chambers and their management and their systems, and ask whether their recruitment policies are fair and transparent and accountable. And there, I think, is where the real change will come, not from the Bar Council of the BSB, because it can set out whatever it likes in terms of the best intentioned statements and initiatives and reports and task forces. But if chambers aren't implementing them, I'm afraid to say the bar's going to move very, very slowly, if at all. And so, as I said earlier, Zara and I are lucky. We're in Garda Court chambers, which is very good on that front. I know other chambers are nowhere near as good. And so the pressure has to be placed on those chambers by their fellow chambers members and within internally from their own members of that chambers that might have problems, asking the hard questions and bringing about the change.
Great, thanks so much, Ali. I'm definitely inspired by all these younger barrister activists that are coming through the system. I'm kind of not as young anymore, sadly. So it's nice to have some company coming through. I think that's really inspiring and gives me hope. And on that, Zara, I'm going to come to you next. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was we often hear about one of the ways of responding to issues of lack of diversity and racism and stuff is about getting more Black and brown faces through the door. I personally have a very real issue with that narrative, and I wondered if you had any thoughts on the limits of representation in that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think trying to have sort of more diversity on the face of it essentially ignores the kind of root problems as to why the bar is the way it is. And I think what we have to recognize is that this system wasn't built for people like us to practice in. The bar has historically been white, it's been historically male, it's been historically for people from very privileged backgrounds. And when I think about the areas that I work in, so thinking about the criminal justice system and the immigration system, for example, those systems were partly built and continue to oppress people like us in our communities. The immigration system is specifically there to ensure that people like my parents will find it more difficult to make a life in this country now. And so we're operating within this. And, when you look at the criminal justice system, for example, looking at kind of statistics on young people in prison, for example, that about 50% of those people are from Black, brown, or other racialized groups. I mean, it's astounding, really, kind of how this system continues to operate. And so I think we have to recognize that sort of the justice system in itself and the bar is inherently racist. It's got these roots, and that's why it is the way it is now. And so that's why I think sort of glossing over that and just saying, well, look, we've got, you know, these faces in these places now means that everything's better, doesn't solve anything for us as practitioners, and doesn't solve anything crucially for our clients who are still really under the thumb of state violence. So I think it is obviously important, though, that we have, you know, people like us there. And I think really addressing the root causes of it and understanding what are the barriers that people face at every point and how can we get rid of those barriers. Obviously, there are lots of incredible people, including obviously everyone on this panel who has made it, but that hasn't come without its challenges. And just showing, you know, people and saying, well, this person made it and therefore you can too, I think is an important and inspiring message, but doesn't go far enough to recognize the realities of what can be difficult in terms of progressing in this profession. And I think in terms of the bar specifically, for me, it's kind of the 3 stages really. There's getting pupillage, there's getting tenancy, and then there's progressing in your career. And I think in terms of getting pupillage, I mean, you know, it took me three times of applications to get pupillage. And I was someone who had a huge amount of experience, even sort of the first time I applied. And obviously each time, obviously my applications got better, but really I think what got better in that process for me was understanding myself better and being sort of unapologetic about who I was. And obviously, you know, getting pupillage at Garden Court was sort of a dream for me. But the question is, you know, me being the way I was and putting myself forward in those applications in totally an authentic way, you know, was that really appealing to other chambers? You know, and that's why, as Ali said, you know, we're really lucky to be somewhere where that is valued, but that is not the case across the bar. And then obviously in terms of tenancy, you know, we also know that across the bar, you know, the statistics in terms of Black and brown pupils getting tenancy is not as great as it is for white pupils. And then you have actually, once you get to tenancy, how you get more and more interesting work, how you get nominated for different awards. And I think it's really telling, because when you look at a lot of the awards that are out there, a lot of people, you know, essentially most of them are white. And I know from being sort of a junior barrister how many amazing people there are at the bar, Black and brown colleagues who are doing, you know, incredible work. And why is that, you know, people of color essentially either don't apply, it's definitely not, the onus is definitely not on them, but why is it that we feel that we don't put ourselves in those spaces? Is it because those spaces don't feel welcome to us? And why is it then when people do throw their hat in the ring, they don't get recognized in the same way? So I think it's really important to sort of interrogate at every point why these problems are happening, why people are not progressing as easily, why people aren't getting the recognition that they deserve. And then I think at that point we can really start to drill down into what needs to be done to ensure that the bar is a more representative place. But I just know kind of from personal experience and from the experiences of friends and colleagues that, you know, I would say that about 90% of my Black and brown friends at the bar who were sort of my level, took them multiple times to get pupillage. And I just cannot understand that when they are some of the most talented, inspiring people I've met. And when I know, you know, plenty of white people who I went to law school with who got it first time round. There's obviously something going wrong there. And I think if we're being, you know, honest about it, the challenges that we face, the things we have to put up with, the amount that, you know, how hard we have to work to actually get to that point is even greater than a lot of our white counterparts as well. And I think, you know, for me, it's always about really thinking about it in an intersectional way as well. I mean, I came from a background where, you know, my parents were not, you know, wealthy, and I had to work part-time throughout university and you know, throughout kind of law school and everything. And, you know, those are also barriers. You know, I didn't have as much time to basically, you know, sit down and make sure that I was getting 100% in every single dissertation or module that I was doing at university, because I was waitressing. So I think, you know, looking at those things as well is really crucial. We can't forget how kind of class, gender and race intersect in all of these experiences that we have. So yeah, I think it's really crucial we sort of get to the bottom of it, and that's the only way we'll move forwards.
Thank you so much for that. I'm literally making notes based on what you said, because there's so many things there that I'd love to kind of unpick with you. So many things that are so current, like what you were saying about the awards. I don't know if this is the experience of other panelists, but have you guys noticed how if there are people of colour in awards, it's always a diversity awards? I myself have been like nominated for stuff over the years, and when I was very junior, I was so excited by it. I was like, yay, like this means something, I'm so excited. And most recently, like last year, I refused to go. I just told my chambers I wasn't going to go to these awards because it's all nonsense. And it was the UK Chambers Awards, where it's like £500 a ticket. I was like, how are you gonna nominate me for some diversity thing when it's not accessible to normal people? So I think there are very real issues around that generally. And just one of the other things that you said that I think is really important is that at a lot of social mobility, quote, events, it's all about, you know, if you work hard, you can achieve, look at us. And I don't know if any of you have often felt like you're pushed forward as the poster girl or the poster person for, hey, the bar's so meritocratic, these guys have done it. And I think that's a really dangerous narrative, because you're making people who perhaps can't get through or aren't getting through, making them feel like they're the problem, whereas obviously we've established it's not. And also the stat, Zara, I don't know if maybe you've come across this given what you were saying, the stats from the BSB diversity survey, which basically says something along the lines of BPTC students with the same degree classification and the same grade at bar school, 23% of you will get pupillage if you're BAME, but if you're white, it's like 40 something, like nearly double, which again, if that doesn't say that there's a problem with race, I'm not sure what does. But I'm going to shut up. We're running over time. I've got a couple more questions, and I think I'm going to just pick two more from this section before I hand over back to Rabia. But I mean, I could talk to you guys for ages just because it's so exciting and insightful. So thank you. I'm going to come to Faiza next. And it kind of links into what Zara was just saying about intersectionality, and whether in your experience, do you feel that intersectionality is something that is properly understood and respected in the profession?
Thank you. I hate to kind of respond and be like, give it kind of like a philosophical response, but I don't think intersectionality is even respected in our own communities. So I don't really know how, you know, our kind of white counterparts or people in the legal profession are supposed to be ahead of us in that game. They're not going to be. We can't even get it right ourselves. I like I said in the previous answer, I'm dealing with a lot of kind of levels to this, you know, being Muslim, being Black, being a woman. And, you know, some might say that it kind of is each one of those sections are kind of like the least respected in a sense. So I feel like generally most of the systems are designed to go against me. It isn't easy, but the thing is, when you're kind of trying to break through these barriers, you will find that you have to explain yourself a lot. You will find that you are the poster girl for a lot of things, or poster man, sorry. But it is a means to an end. The more you do this, the more you explain, the more you kind of just bear patience, which obviously is very good. Some Islamic you know, reasonings coming in there. Be patient with them, understand where they're coming from, and you literally will win. Yesterday, I was in a Clubhouse room. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this Clubhouse that's, you know, taking over social media right now. And there were 300 Black women who were interested in pursuing a career in law. that blew my mind, because I was speaking to these people that I once had no means of interacting with them, because there's a lot of people in kind of like this climate where we can't speak to each other face to face, but there were 300 women in there who all wanted to talk about, had questions to ask and things like that. And I was there, we were there for 3 hours and 15 minutes speaking and responding to questions. And yes, it was tiring. By the end of it, my mouth was so dry. But again, this is just something that I am willing to do, to put up with, to help people understand the things that are going on. I'm not necessarily visibly Muslim because I don't wear hijab, but nowadays that's one of the first things that will come out of my mouth, because you know that's what defines me in my bio on Clubhouse. That is what defines me. It's clearly written there that I am a Muslim. So it gives way for people who identify with me to come and speak to me and say things like, oh, you know, I don't know, my Nigerian background, my parents want me to be a partner in the firm, but I don't want to. Then don't be a partner in the firm if you don't want to. They want you to open your own firm at some stage. My dad was sending me a text and he was like, oh, he calls me his, I really don't know how to say this word, but I think it's an erudite lawyer or erudite daughter, that kind of thing. And I'm just like, oh, Dad, please. But, you know, these are the things that you will deal with. They will put you on a pedestal. They will, you know, really push you to be the best that you can. But as long as you can say that you are open-minded, you're there to kind of teach people to some degree, then yeah, you'll be fine. And you will see people who are like you start to come up the ranks as well.
Thanks so much for that, Faiza. And the last question from this section of the discussion, at least, is for Ali. And just because I'm really interested in the answer to this one, so it's a bit of a mouthful, just bear with me, I'm going to have to read it off something. So the BSB Diversity Survey 2019 records the following in respect of religions and belief at the bar. There are 244 Jewish non-QCs and 67 Jewish QCs. There are 89 Sikh non-QCs and 8 Sikh QCs, and there are 120 Hindu non-QCs and 7 Hindu QCs. And comparatively, there are 304 Muslim non-QCs and 9 Muslim QCs. Why do you think that there is a difference between the ratio of Muslim non-QCs to QCs as compared to other faith groups? That was a big mouthful, but I'm sure you're going to make the answer make sense to all the audience.
I'll do my best. I mean, Zina, look, to make the audience just understand that a little more clearly, I hope I can explain it for them, that if you look at, I've looked at the figures because I had some advance notice that you might ask me something about, you know, the ratio of Muslim QCs to juniors compared to other religious background groups. And if you look at Jewish barristers, roughly 1 in 5 Jewish barristers is a QC. If you look at Sikh barristers, those who have declared a faith, by the way, that's important to all of this. Roughly 1 in 12 are QCs. Hindu barristers, roughly 1 in 18 are QCs. Muslim barristers, it's roughly 1 in 35. So that is the sort of bare facts in terms of the statistics. And that's coming from 2019. Obviously, it changes year on year, and it changes not slowly year on year. I know myself that in the last year, so since 2019, since these statistics were issued, there were 3 more Muslim QCs to add to that number. So that's going to change the ratio somewhat. But also, I know that in the terms of Muslim QCs that on the declared on the 2019 diversity survey, there were 9 QCs who declared a Muslim background. Now, I know 13 Muslim QCs myself, and I'm sure I don't know every single one. So there must be more than that. So we have to look at these statistics with some care. I mean, they're not completely misleading. Of course they're not. I mean, they tell a story, but we have to be careful before we start drawing too many conclusions from these statistics. It looks as though the Muslim juniors have a difficulty in becoming QCs. That's what it looks like on the face of it. And that could be because the numbers aren't the issue. There are 304 junior Muslim QCs compared to 122 Hindus, 89 Sikh, a good number, a very large number of Jewish juniors, but Muslims are the largest minority religious group, obviously, and for obvious reasons. And so the difficulty isn't in getting there. It may be in practice development, a point that's been touched on already in terms of progressing your practice. It may be a little issue of putting ourselves forward and making the applications. It may be in the past an issue to do with appointment in terms of being recognized as somebody worthy of taking silk. In the last 10 years or so, we've had the QC appointments panel, who have maybe a bit longer than that, but the QC appointments panel now appoints people to silk, and I know that it tries to be very careful in being fair in its appointments. So it issues fastidiously year on year its figures for minority groups, racial, I don't know if it does religious, but it certainly does racial groups in terms of proportions of that year's applications that were appointed to silk. And in recent years, and I mean the last 3 or 4 years, the QC appointments panel has been of the BAME applicants, about half of them have gone on to actually take silk. So it doesn't look as though at that stage it's necessarily a problem in terms of appointment. It might be practice development, and it might be in terms of putting ourselves forward and going for it. That might be the problem actually in terms of the numbers. Again, just sounding a little, I can't give much more by way of theorizing or opinion on this, because, you know, that's as far as the stats takers, that's as far as an opinion can go. We're lawyers, we base our submissions normally on evidence, and the evidence on this, I'm afraid, is lacking, although the statistics suggest there's a problem. The cause, we don't have direct evidence. I think Zara may have touched on deeper problems than just the top level. And so my view is that, you know, again, sounding a little note of hope, I know that in the years to come, I can think of very, very many good Muslim juniors who I've no doubt will become QCs, and the figures will start to correct, I hope not too slowly, and you'll start to see the right proportion of Muslim juniors become QCs.
Thanks so much, Ali, and thanks so much for making that question make sense. I did attempt to do the ratios yesterday, then I couldn't figure it out, so I was like, sack this, but you did it perfectly. So thank you so much. I am going to hand over to Rabia, who's going to deal with the rest of the webinar. Thank you all so much for the fantastic conversation we've just had and all of your insights, very much appreciated. So Rabia, over to you.
Thank you, Zeenat. Hi, everyone again. So I have some generic questions for all of the panelists, so just feel free to answer them according to how you feel is best. So my first question is, what practical steps do you think that chambers and firms can take in order to address these issues of Islamophobia and issues of race that a lot of people feel whilst being at these firms and chambers? Mira, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing that's really important is we've talked about structural issues, but I think it's important to recognize that the structural issues at the bar impact on people more if they are from minoritized backgrounds than they do otherwise. So for example, at the moment, the extended hours proposal, I think things at the bar, like the way, so definitely in terms of it, from just talking about inquests and inquiries, there is practically no way to get into this area of the profession without working for very many years, even to get to the stage of becoming a trainee solicitor. Unlike commercial firms, where there's a really clearly defined path. In terms of the top human rights firms, they don't advertise training contracts, and you can't apply straight off the bat for a training contract. You have to do other things. You have to be a paralegal or work. You basically have to be a paralegal, work your way up. And to become a paralegal, you tend to have experience working for charity. It's really, really difficult. And coming from a background where you don't know lawyers, you don't really know the area, you don't understand how it works, and you need to make money, to put it bluntly, quite quickly to make ends meet, building a career in this area of law is really, really difficult. And I think that's part of the reason why I kind of was saying at the beginning, even though we work on a very human rights centered area of law, it's not very diverse. I think that's partly why. So I think part of what the bar has to do, and part of what solicitors firms I think have to do, is look at their working practices in general to be really robust about things like extended working hours, because they're not going to affect the people who are the most privileged. Or, for example, another thing is judicial bullying, which, for example, I was speaking to a white male barrister who was quite a bit older than me, and he was saying, look, I think the problem at the moment is that the barristers coming through are just too soft, you know. Judicial bullying is just like, it's something that you have to put up with, everybody has, and you have to be able to grow a thick skin and put up with it. And I was kind of sitting there looking at him and thinking, yeah, but I bet you don't actually get the sharp end of it, because what actually tends to happen is when you're at the bottom of the pile as a woman, as a Black woman, or as a hijabi, or a woman of color, you tend to get the sharpest end of that. And so we may, I think as a profession, we put up with too many things that are barriers structurally within our system, and just say, this is what it is to be a barrister, or this is what it is to be a solicitor. Can't put up with it, go find another profession. And I think we have to address those issues to create kind of real change.
Thank you for that, Mira. Would any of the other speakers like to tackle this question? Zahra, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, yeah, I totally agree with everything Mira said. And I would just add that something else I think is really important is really recognizing people from, you know, really, really sort of mixed backgrounds as experts, really, in ways that we're not always recognized as experts. And I don't mean that to say that, you know, barristers who are Muslim should only be, you know, should be representing all the Muslim clients and that's sort of their niche. Obviously, you know, we can all do everything and we can represent clients from any background, and that's something that's so wonderful about being a barrister. And I think we're coming from the starting point that everyone who you know, is a professional is obviously very capable. But I think recognizing that added expertise that we can add to particular cases, or the nuances that we'll understand, or the ways that we can interact with clients and our communities, is really important. And I think chambers need to harness that more, and obviously not do it in a top-down way, but do it in a way where when people want to build particular practices, want to represent certain groups, that they're given the opportunity to do that and to, you know, put all of that on the table. And I think I say that because, you know, for me personally, that's really important. I really see my job as representing my own communities and other oppressed groups. And I think it's been really fundamental to the work that I've done. And, you know, it's sort of things like, you know, I was doing a lot of immigration bails over lockdown, and that was kind of particularly, you know, there were obviously people in detention during Ramadan, and there's obviously a disproportionate number of Muslims in detention than there are in, you know, kind of the general population, given sort of the racism within the system. And a lot of the clients at that particular time were struggling because of COVID, they had to have meals at, you know, certain hours to ensure social distancing and all that stuff. But that obviously had an impact on Muslim people in detention because they were fasting. And so then they couldn't necessarily break their fast at the right time. And so there were all these kind of discriminatory issues. And the only reason that that came up, and the reason that I and another colleague were able to glean those insights from those clients, is because we were asking those questions and we knew what to think about and how we could use that sort of particular experience to help us in whatever we were trying to do in their cases. And I think, you know, kind of a similar thing happened in another case where, you know, and again, kind of thinking about judicial bullying and how that affects clients as well, you know, trying to resist a removal. And the individual, he was a Muslim guy and he was looking after his elderly parents. And the judge basically said, you know, why can't you just get a carer? And not, you know, obviously, you know, some people might not understand the nuances of kind of our communities and our cultures of, you know, what it means to sort of look after your family and do that sort of thing, and why the option of just getting a carer or whatever is not something that they can really, you know, reasonably and realistically consider. And so I think it's that kind of nuance and that kind of understanding and relationship that you can build with a client, and that you can build with people you work with, that's really important. And I don't think that that's valued as expertise. I think that's seen as tokenism, or it's seen as like, you know, you go and do that for these people. But I actually think that that is real, you know, knowledge, and that needs to be recognized and respected. So I think that's something else that would be helpful.
Thank you, Zahra. I think Fess wanted to answer this question as well.
Yeah, so I think that one of the major steps that firms and companies in general should be doing is education, because the more you get information out there, simple things like when I was training, receiving an email from one of the directors saying Eid Mubarak. It's lovely, it's nice, it didn't take you more than 2 seconds. There's nothing wrong with that. And those who don't know what Eid is, what's Eid? Why is Dominic sending this email? That's when the questions start to come, and that's when you start to say, oh, it's, you know, a very lovely day, I spend it with my family, and you give them all the spiel that, you know, you can. That is how you start to break down the barriers in terms of like with your colleagues and stuff like that. You know, as far as the clients are concerned, turning the clients away who say, oh, I don't want this person to represent me because they are so and so, which is things that I have experienced back in private practice. You know, when I was going through whatever I was going through, I went towards the Arabic pronunciation of my name, which is Faiza. So when I'm on the phone, hello, my name's Faiza, this is this, and explain to them. Then when I have my face-to-face meeting with the client, it's, oh, I thought you were Asian. And then they don't want to work with me anymore. And I was like, but you love to be on the phone. So I understand why you don't want to work with me anymore. So things like shutting that down and being like, no, if you do not want to be represented by this person on this basis, then we can't work with you and you will have to find, you know, different representation, things like that, and being very strict and stern and understanding that you can't do that.
Thank you, Faiza. I realise I mispronounced your name as well, so apologies about
No,
that.
please. I really not made it easy for you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone. So just before we go on to the Q&A, this is for all of the panelists. If you were to give sort of in one sentence, nugget of wisdom for any aspiring Muslim lawyers, what would it be? We can start with Ali.
We've talked a lot, Zara and I, about our chambers, but our chamber's motto is do right, fear no one. And I'm going to give that advice to everyone in the audience and even any panelist who might benefit from it. Do right always and fear absolutely no one. And if you do those two things, there's no reason to have any imposter syndrome, any insecurity, any sense that you don't belong in the legal profession. You do. I appreciate I might have had it slightly easier than some, being male, maybe even looking, you know, again, obviously Muslim and so on. And I come from a state school background, a working class background, a fairly humble sort of economic family. And I've had to make it as well, even though I may not have suffered some of the disadvantages and difficulties and even discrimination, overt or more subtle, that others have had. But one of the key things is to feel you belong, to fear no one, to absolutely feel that you have a right to be where you are. And that makes a world of difference to getting there where you should be.
Thank you for that, Ali. Sana, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of have three like little points as part of this little jam session. So one is to go for it. There is no point in thinking, what if I'm the only one? You might be the only one, and that's okay. Once you get there, everybody else can follow after you if you are the first. And the second part of that is once you have made it, I think there's an obligation to kind of pay that forward and make life easier for those that come up behind you. So primarily just go for it, or as Nike says, just do it. And I don't normally quote Nike, but this is an exception. The second thing is to be authentic, to be your true self and to bring your whole self to the table. So that means just being really open and honest with the people that you talk to. And a lot of this comes from my own, one of my previous partners when I was working, as I still am, at Travis. And she said, Sana, authenticity is one of the most important things you will ever bring to the table. So be authentic, and people respond to you when you're authentic, whether that's clients, whether that's the people that you're working with, whether that's people that you randomly meet at a networking session, they respond to authenticity. So I think it's really important to bring your whole self to the table and to be genuine, to be honest, and to not be afraid of having these honest conversations. If something is making you uncomfortable, obviously there are ways to say things, but the important part is to have that conversation. If you see things that can be improved, speak up, say, go speak to your HR person, or your graduate recruitment, or the partnership board, or whoever that might be, and say, you know what, I think we need to talk about this, and this is what I think. And people notice that they see you, making that effort and trying to make things better, and they respond to it. And the last one is get yourself a mentor. So, I'm dropping things here, getting a little bit too excited. Get yourself a mentor. So a mentor is probably one of the most invaluable things that I've ever come across, whether this is a mentor in your organization or outside of your organization, it doesn't really matter. But I think it's really important to have that safe space where you can talk to somebody that maybe has a little bit more experience than you, and you can help guide you on certain topics. And your mentor doesn't need to be someone that comes from the same background as you. One of my mentors is, he's definitely not Muslim. he's this white male, and he is probably one of my biggest backers. And we have these bi-monthly catch-ups where we just talk absolute nonsense, and I'll tell him I've had a horrible day and this is the latest inconvenience in my life. And he's literally one of the best people I've ever met. So your mentor does not necessarily need to be Muslim or whoever. It just needs to be someone that understands your perspective and listens to you when you're talking, and is looks out for you and has your best interests at heart. And that's the kind of person that should be your mentor. Obviously, if you can find one who is Muslim, you can have two mentors, that's not a problem, but start with one first and you can build your way up. But I think mentoring is one of those really key things that not many people talk about, and I think it's just so important to have someone, whether it's someone that you look up to, whether it's someone you feel safe with, but just that space where you can talk about things and bounce ideas and say, I've been thinking about this and we're not doing it quite right, but I don't know how to approach this. And they can give you a little bit of advice. I mean, I have these catch-up calls with my HR / diversity director. Like, I think at this stage he probably hates me because he's like, oh my god, this girl, she's here for round 2 of this conversation. I'm like, Chris, I've been thinking, and I feel like this has been my experience, and I think we need to talk about this. And he will say, okay, Sana, like, why don't we talk a little bit more about this and see what we can do. So mentoring comes in all shapes and sizes. So if there is one thing that you do, whether no matter what stage of your career you're at, even if you're just starting out, or if you are, in the career already and you're kind of thinking, well, where do I go from here? Get yourself a mentor. So those are my 3 little takeaways.
Thank you, Sana. We'll go over to Zahra next, if that's okay.
Sure. I would probably start just with my favorite quote from my favorite Muslim icon, Malcolm X, which is, "Truth is on the side of the oppressed." And I think that this really does apply to how I approach my cases, how I approach my client stories, but also crucially applies to all of us. I would just say, live your truth, live it fully and wholly, and know that you can overcome the systemic and structural barriers that we face within this profession. I totally agree with what others have said. Find solidarity, find mentors, and events like this are also really important in finding that community. Also, don't second guess yourself. You know, what Mira was mentioning earlier about you know, being sort of relieved that a client had recognized racism and sexism that she'd experienced in the courtroom. And I think so many of us and the experiences we've shared tonight about Islamophobia, the first thing we often think is like, surely it can't be that. Surely, you know, I'm reading into it. Surely I'm being oversensitive. But no, know your truth. Know that these experiences matter. They're real. Challenge that injustice when you see it, and seek support to challenge it if you need it, because, you know, we shouldn't be in this fight on our own. So I think ultimately, you know, truth is on the side of the oppressed. It really does encapsulate the fact that you just shouldn't doubt your own abilities. You should doubt the system, and in doing that, then you can be part of actually changing it. So yeah.
Thank you, Zahra. Go over to Mira and then Faiza.
My maybe counterintuitive advice is, you are you, your job is your job. And I think it's really important to focus on being happy in yourself and in who you are, with or without pupillage, with or without a training contract, with or without all the success that you're looking for. You're not your experiences, you're not your success. You want to be a person that you can actually look at yourself in the mirror and be like, you know what, I'm living up to my principles as to who I am and who I want to be. And I feel like if you, because I feel like I have on occasion. So for example, when I wasn't when I wasn't being vocal about racism and stuff, I did kind of put who I was to one side so that I could progress in my career. And looking back, that was a massive mistake. It did help me progress in my career, but it was a mistake. And I think it's important that you can be comfortable with yourself, comfortable with who you are, and comfortable with your role in your life generally, and keep it in proportion. You know, and it's very easy to say when you have pupillage, even though, you know, I may not get tenancy, I may not progress to the next level. And I think it's important to have that sense of, and in Islam, we've got this concept of, you know, the dunya is in your hand, it's not in your heart. And I think that's actually probably the best way to be. It's something that I feel like I've developed a lot over the last few years. And it's the one thing that I think we should all be trying to aim towards.
Thank you, Mira. And Faiza?
Yeah, so funny enough, mine is kind of just a bit of everyone's. So what I wrote was, feel the fear and do it anyway. You're not here by mistake. Don't compromise your faith for like worldly gratification. Allah will provide for you. And each of those resonates with me a lot, because back when I used to do advocacy before I appeared before DJ, I would, you know, say Bismillah before I start speaking, and I would be nervous, I would be sweating, I was thinking, oh my God, can I do this, you know? But I'm not there by mistake. I was there for a reason. I'm there to put like my pinch of sauce on this whole thing, and yeah, you can do it. If your mind was so developed enough to say, actually, this is the career path I want to pursue, then do it. And, you know, if it's not for you, or if you find that you can't, you know, afford to do something now, there is always later. It's actually the only, and I say this all the time, the only time that it's too late is when you're dead, because you literally can't do it anymore. So go for it. Always go for it. You will be fine. There are loads of people who are willing to talk to you and talk you through this. As Sana said, it's mentorship is so important, and don't always look for the formal kind of idea of mentorship. Having someone to speak to on a one-off basis is a form of mentorship. Take it, grasp it, and, you know, really cherish it. So yes, that's mine.
Thank you, Faiza, and thank you to all of our speakers for these nuggets. I found them very useful, and I think a lot of our audience watching will have found them very useful as well. I'll just pass over to Zenat now for the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Rabia, and also for those nuggets of wisdom. I was writing notes for myself, so thank you all so much. I'm very conscious of the time, and we try and keep to a culture of like actually sticking to time. So if there are speakers that need to drop off at 7:30, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer to deal with any burning questions that people might have. If speakers are happy to stay on for another 5 minutes or so, then that would be really great. But again, if you need to go for anything else, then please do. And if anyone's got any burning questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I think we've got 2 that have come through, which are kind of more generic. How did you decide whether to do the bar or the LPC? Is there anyone that wants to take that one? Maybe somebody that's kind of in pupillage or just recently qualified. Or not?
I don't mind taking that one.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I actually did quite a few mini pupillages before before I decided to go for a career in corporate law. So for me, it was quite straightforward. I mean, I really enjoyed my pupillage experience. I thought it was great. But I am just such a people's person that I didn't really like working on my own, and the bar seemed quite solitary. I really didn't want to be in a room by myself, just preparing for this, half an hour in court, like, one day in court with after months and months and months of prep. So, which might necessarily not have been the greatest indicator, but also I'm just such a team-based person, and I really like, client contact. For me, that's probably one of the biggest things. So I thought about all of these things, and for me, it kind of made sense to go down the solicitor route, which is how I ended up then naturally progressing onto the LPC. But and I think a lot of it comes down to the kind of person you are. I think you naturally know what your strengths are and what you'd enjoy doing. One of my barrister friends, she, to this day, every time I speak to her, which is going to be, oh, she's ex-Garden Court as well. So there is that as well. Every time I speak to her in our 6-monthly catch-up, she'll say, Sana, I really don't know why you're in the city. Just come to the bar. So I think it's a lot about just knowing yourself and what your strengths are, what you're good at, and what you'll enjoy doing the most. And if that thing is the bar, then go for it. I mean, the concerns around whether or not you will get in should be secondary. If that is what you want to do, I think, once you've committed to it, go hard and go in, and that's it. It'll be fine. And then on the other side, if you're not 100% certain that you like what the bar looks like, and you don't see yourself being a barrister for the next 10-15 years, or you're just not confident that that place is for you, then maybe you could try have another think and see if perhaps solicitor route is going to be more viable for you. And lastly, you can always do istikhara. If all else fails, istikhara is the way to go. Just pray a couple of rakats, do istikhara, and I'm sure make a decision and stick to it.
Thank you so much for that, Sana. The next question that I'm going to ask, conscious of the time, I'm going to ask Ali for this actually. Why did you all choose your specific area of law?
Criminal law, I mean, it's nothing highbrow. I wish I could pretend it was something intellectual or massively principled. I like being in court and speaking. And I used to watch programs on television about courtroom scenes. I still do, and find them massively exciting. And I thought that's where I wanted to try to be. And I emphasize try because, it's not a given that that's what will suit you. And I agree entirely with Sana, who said, you've really got to go with your skills, not with your heart or your dreams. You've got to go with your head as to where your skills are best suited. And if I'd found that, when I did stand up in a criminal court and do the advocacy, that it wasn't for me, then there's no shame at all in changing. I like law as well, enormously, as well as the advocacy side and being in courtrooms, cross-examining and making closing speeches. And you do more of that in crime than any other area, which is why I chose crime. But I like law as well. So I would have been very happy to do another area of law. I'd have been very happy to become a solicitor, actually. You have, a lot of close client contact. You do a lot of the same things. Really, the difference between the two professions is written or oral advocacy is more at the bar and less as a solicitor. But crime, actually, because of Crown Court and 12 Angry Men A Few Good Men, is that the Tom Cruise movie? It's that sort of stuff that just made me think, I want to give that a go. So I gave it a go, and I still like it.
Thank you, Ali. There's also another question that's come in for you whilst I've got you, which is a belated congratulations on becoming a recorder from somebody that was a mini pupil many years ago. So you've got a fan on here. And the question is, how was your journey to being a recorder, and how do you find the role?
Well, look, I'm old, and when you're old enough, they tend to sometimes open up, opportunities tend to open up. And an opportunity like that sort of comes along when you're over a certain number of years experience. So you've got to be over 15 years experience. And then these positions, vacancies for sitting as a recorder, part-time judge for anybody who doesn't know, open up as well. They're advertised and you apply. And I applied. I got rejected first time. And then the next time I applied, luckily I passed the tests and I passed the interview and I was accepted. And on that front, funnily enough, I have to say, I think it's a fantastic part of being a barrister that you can sit part-time as a judge. And you know, anybody who's in the position where they're able to apply or thinking about applying, I'd recommend it, because you get a chance to do a taster as to what it's like to be a judge. It makes you a better advocate. And I think it gives you an idea as to whether you want to do this long term or not. So I'd highly recommend it. And that's how I did it. And thanks for the congratulations, whoever sent it.
Ali, are you a nice tribunal to be in front of?
I always remember what it's like to be the other end, to be a barrister. And so I keep that in mind. I'm not going to suggest that I'm the pussycat that you can be sometimes, but I strike a balance. I'm sure I get it vaguely right.
Very fair, which is all.
Firm but fair.
Thank you. Okay, next question. And I think I might ask Mira about this, given she said she's currently in Liverpool. I'm not sure if any of the panelists are northern, but do you think being from the north puts Muslim women at a disadvantage naturally because of the less diversity up here, and what could be done to overcome this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently in Liverpool. I am also from, I'm not from Liverpool itself, but I'm from round here. And yes, I think there is less diversity. I think we have different problems than you have in London. Liverpool, for example, is very segregated. There is a Muslim community, but it's a very, like, there are proper kind of areas where the Muslim community live and areas where they don't. And as a Muslim working in the north, you are very much in a minority. What can be, and for, you know, to take an example, Garden Court itself, very, very diverse. Garden Court North, where I'm at, or, you know, very diverse in comparison to Barristers' Chambers. Garden Court North, where I'm at, less diverse. We've got the same ethos, we have the same kind of commitment, but when I was applying to Garden Court North, I did look at the website, and I think there was one other woman of colour in the entire chambers. And I was thinking, oh, well, you know, this, but so yeah, there is a bigger problem, I think, up north. I think part of it as well is that we come from very deprived communities, generally Muslims up north. And I think that's part of the issue. What can be done to overcome it? I think the north in general needs, I think it's like a political overarching issue. I don't think it should put you off applying to Northern Chambers at all, because I think Northern Chambers now are getting quite hip to the idea that they need to become more, like, I definitely think you should apply. I think there is a general problem in terms of investment in communities in the north and helping people at a actual kind of schools, infrastructure, all of that kind of level, which is a much bigger conversation. But I think the north is massively disadvantaged when it comes to that, and that shows in the diversity.
Thank you for that, Mira. One last question before we close the session today. From Rabia herself, Pupillage Gateway has recently opened. What advice would you give to those applying for pupillage? Zara, can I come to you on that, given you are a recent tenant? Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. So I would say the key thing is to firstly really tailor your applications to each chambers that you're applying for. Don't do a copy and paste job. Don't think that it's enough just to have a cursory look at the website. Really get an understanding of what kind of work that chambers does, if it has a particular slant or an ethos like Garden Court, what that is, what it means, and make sure that you're aligning your experiences and your interests to exactly what that chambers does. And you know, the kind of craft of writing a perfect answer is really that. It is really a craft, so really spend time on it. Secondly, get people to read your applications before you send them. So I would say try, and if you have people, so you know, obviously there are lots of people on the panel here who are lawyers. If you've met people at other events who you can contact to ask them to read your applications, definitely do that. So basically get your application read by a barrister, preferably someone who's at that chambers or someone who's at a similar chambers, and then also get it read by someone who's a non-lawyer so that they can sense check it and do the proofreading. And then I think the third thing I would say is, and sort of links to what I said earlier, be really authentic in your answers. Obviously that comes with the caveat of what I said about tailoring it to chambers, and be realistic about particular chambers and what they might be looking for. But generally I would say be honest. In my year that I was successful, and in the year that I got more interviews than I'd ever got before, I was really honest about my motivations to becoming a barrister, my background, my experiences, and I think that that came across well. And as someone who's been on the other side of doing recruitment at my, you know, reading application forms when I was working at Liberty, when we were recruiting interns, it really does stand out when someone just is really truthful about who they are, and it just, you know, does come across a lot better than trying to be who you think chambers want you to be. So it's a careful balancing act, but really I think getting people to read your applications is probably really key, because they'll give you pointers and give yourself enough time to follow that process through as well.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I've seen there's another question come through, but I did say we're going to close, so I am going to close the session. We're 10 minutes over. Thank you all so very much, our panelists, for giving up your evening to talk to us all today, and also all of our participants. I think we've had some new people join us that haven't been on a Redefined event before, so thank you so much. And I just wanted to close on something that really resonates with me at times, that I feel a little bit disillusioned and perhaps not always like I'm on the right path, and just try and remember my why as to why I came to the bar and why I do what I do. And it's a quote from the Quran. It's one of my favorite verses, chapter 4, verse 135, which reads, "O believers, stand firm for justice as witnesses for God, even if it is against yourselves, your parents, or close relatives." So I guess for me, the reason why that's so powerful is that actually the job that we do, much like what Mira was saying early on, it's all about justice and doing what is right. And sometimes it's a hard thing to do, but it has to be done. So thank you all so much. I'm really inspired by everybody here. Lots of nuggets of wisdom to take away, and really grateful for you all. So thank you so much. Keep in touch and stay safe and well.
Thank you.